Some are listening. They won't tell you the truth because the black book is the easiest gravy train that they've ever been on. Yet Allen came to me, Oral Roberts spoke this, Billy Graham came right to us, Imes, Jack, and me in Claypool Hotel, said, I don't believe a thing in that Bible hardly. Right. But he said, it's the way to make a living. Billy Graham, who I prophesied his death, Billy Branham rather, said his head would be, I said he'd lose his head. His head was cut off in Texas. He said, you can't preach the truth about that Bible. He said, you preach reincarnation. You cannot preach the truth about the Bible. You will be in trouble. I said, I choose to preach the truth. He said, well, I'll be around while you will be in trouble. Well, I'm still here, and his head is cut off from his body.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Long for Truth. My name is Daniel Long, and next to me in Indiana, actually, or is it this way? It's that. There we go. Over here. There. That's John Collins. John Collins is the author of one of my favorite books, Jim Jones, the Malachi 4 Elijah Prophecy. His latest book is Preacher Behind the White Hoods, a critical examination of William Branham and his message. And John, tell everybody about your website and the videos that you've done there.
And my website is William Branham Historical Research. You can find it at william-branham.org, and it is approximately a decade full of research. Mm-hmm. On my website, it doesn't look like it when you first navigate to it, but there is almost 20 gigs of data on the website that's available for researchers. It's mostly concentrated around William Branham, who was the leader of the post-World War II healing revival. But because of the many connections and ebbs and flows of this movement, it created numerous splinter groups, and each one of them is just as interesting as William Branham. So I recently in an interview, I was talking about comparing it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You've got this group of characters, each one has this crazy interesting backstory, and an entire movie and book can be written about them. Well, the same thing about William Branham. You've got 100 of these evangelists, each one just as interesting, and I could write for the next, the rest of my life and not even skim the surface of these men.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about some of the connections, but we're also going to be talking about the whole Elijah and Jim Jones connection there too, and that's going to be really interesting. But so I don't know if you saw I know you watched the video that Steve and I did, but when I was watching YouTube, when you had your original YouTube channel up with all of those videos on the YouTube channel, I was sitting here eating dinner, watching, and all of a sudden, gone. Yeah. Your channel just disappeared. And I'm like, wait a minute, what happened? I'm sitting here trying to go back and trying to find it. And I call up Steve and I say, Steve, try to get on John Collins' YouTube channel. Couldn't do it. So what exactly happened there? Just to clear things up a bit.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you something. I've actually never mentioned this in an interview. I run a software consulting company. So what I do is very sophisticated. I don't have average computers like you would see in a normal household. I've got servers and computers, and they're here, they're there, they're everywhere. And in my house, I have to keep it highly secure for clients. And I have to actually isolate because the attacks are so sophisticated against the William Branham stuff I do. I have to isolate it from my other clients and keep everything totally separate where the two cannot cross. Well, I was working towards working on a client, working on a project, and I was actually on site at a facility. And I got a call from my wife, and she says, our internet's down. And I got on my computer, I dialed in, and I could connect in, and I could see our router, our modem. I could physically get in, so I knew it's not down. So our router's more sophisticated than usual. I got into the logs, and while I'm in there, I see there's somebody else in there at the same time as me. And
Oh,
my router
wow.
has 6 antennas, and it broadcasts. I mean, it broadcasts like the whole city block. It was crazy, that this particular router that I had.
Wow.
Well, I'm in here, and I see somebody else is in here, and I watch as they disabled all of the antenna.
What?
So my wife was actually, she could have connected had she plugged in, but she was wireless and she couldn't get in. So this person disabled my antennas. Then they disabled the hard connections. And I'm freaking out. Like, how are they doing this? And the moment I freaked out, I started getting text messages: copyright strike, copyright strike, copyright strike.
Oh.
And it was coming from multiple countries. I got copyright strikes from Africa, from Indiana, everybody attacking the YouTube site that I had. And with YouTube, they really don't care whether it's legit.
No, they don't. They really don't.
You get a few of them, then boom, your site's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have fought it. I have legal counsel, and I discussed it. And the problem is the cult has such a massive amount of money flowing through it. It would have just been a money pit for me.
Yeah.
So I have, because of the technology, I have additional capabilities. The websites went back, the videos went back up, but instead of one single source, I have it broadcasting to multiple. And so if one source goes down, then another one just replicates. So as long as you go to william-branham.org, you can get to the videos. The video that you watch today may not be the video that you watch tomorrow because it may replicate to another source.
Ah, gotcha. Well, they're all there, and as I said, they're absolutely worth going through. I mean, well, I was telling you earlier that this is going to be like my 4th time going through them, and there's like, what is it, 40 videos on your website?
So the overview, which is basically the summary of the entire set of collection of research on the website, there's 39 videos there.
Yes.
But I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 videos that are on the website.
Yeah, I haven't gone that deep.
We recently introduced a feature where it actually goes out to we have several partners, and it's automatically pulling in the partner videos into the library, so you can also see the partners.
Wow.
And we have one stream that is example cult videos. If you want to see how the cult is indoctrinating people, there's an entire feed of their videos on the website.
Wow. So, John, we were talking, and we were planning on doing an interview. We were trying to nail down a date, and you said, "Well, you know what? I've got some time today." So folks, we're doing this like right off. I mean, this is literally off the cuff. But one of the things that I wanted to do, because I talked about this with Steve Kozar in our last video, is I want to show the connections. And I want to talk a little bit about Gordon Lindsey's connection with William Branham. And I'd like to talk a little bit about F.F. Bosworth's connection with William Branham. And then to top it off, talk about Jim Jones and his connection. And then you told me that you had a bomb that you were willing to drop if we did this thing today. So I'll save that for folks at the end. Because folks, seriously, this is serious stuff here. So let's talk about Gordon Lindsey a little bit. What can you tell us about Gordon Lindsey's connection to William Branham?
So Gordon Lindsey was, he basically was the person who was one of the heaviest promoters of William Branham's ministries. So William Branham had several stage personas, and on the website you can see them. Before 1947, he had an entirely different alleged healing ministry where he's healing the sick and, claims to supernatural events. Well, he reinvented himself in 1947, and he did so at the same time that the latter rain was being birthed. And so you're familiar with latter rain?
Yes.
Through Canada. Well, during the course of this, William Branham, his popularity just skyrocketed. For for reasons that I try to explain in the book, but it is extremely complicated to explain. He had very strong supporters in white supremacy in the United States. He had the Sharon Orphanage. He had all of these men who were propagating him through Canada. And there were various other connections of men who were, for whatever reason, wanting to lift William Branham up into fame. Mm-hmm. And they were successful in doing so. So in I think it's either 47 or 48, there was a newsletter created called The Voice of Healing. And William Branham was the publisher. It was a magazine about William Branham. William Branham at that time was being advertised in the newspapers as America's Voice of Healing. Mm. So in combination with America's Voice comes the newsletter about William Branham. Well, during the course of all of this, Branham had some mental health issues. And it's like 2 or 3 issues in, I can't remember exactly when, but he went off of the field, and they still have a newsletter, and there's all of these people in the revival, so why not fill the gap with other ministers too? Mm-hmm. So that became, that was really how the Voice of Healing was formed. Gordon Lindsey was basically the driving force behind that. Mm-hmm. So Gordon Lindsey became essentially one of the heaviest promoters of William Branham.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the history of Gordon Lindsey, one of the things I found out just by my own research is that Gordon Lindsey also had ties with John G. Lake. In his earlier, he was born in Zion City, which was Dowie's gigantic commune, and when his parents left and they moved to Oregon, I believe that's where it was, where John G. Lake was. As a teenager, Lindsey claims that he went to Lake's church where Charles Fox Parham was preaching, and was converted under the preaching of Charles Fox Parham. And then John G. Lake, takes a liking to him. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but Lake actually took him with him on some of his campaigns, and actually gave him a tent to use for his own. But he wasn't a very good healing revivalist. But he was a good promoter, because he really did promote William Branham. That was a big thing. So that's Lindsey's connection. Let's talk about Bosworth, F.F. Bosworth, because Bosworth was also connected to Branham, and Bosworth was connected to Dowie.
Yeah, so Dowie's a big part of this. Mm. My next book, I'm probably 2/3 of the way through writing, is going to be about John Alexander Dowie.
Awesome.
Dowie was the prototype for what we see in all of these evangelists. Mm-hmm. Bosworth was the leader of the music ministry in Zion City, I believe it was, mm-hmm. and one of the original founders of the Assemblies of God. The formation of Zion City itself is interesting because of the situation that was happening in Chicago that basically created the need to move to Zion City. You cannot not be influenced by this, right?
Right.
You've got all of this criminal aspects. People were dying. People were suing. People all over the nation. They're learning that Dowie might be able to heal, but also these people are dying, and the city's suing him, and the police are after him. Yeah. So it has an impact, right?
Yeah. And he had these healing homes, like you said, and I've got plenty of newspaper articles clipped that show Dowie, showing the deaths that took place in Dowie's, his healing homes. But he created an entire city, and that city had a bank, it had factories, it had, he literally had people, at least, in the newspaper articles talking about, he literally had people that he would make them stop and pray during certain times of the day. You couldn't have alcohol, you couldn't have tobacco, you couldn't eat pork. It was the whole thing was crazy, and Bosworth was connected to that. So what is Bosworth's relationship to William Branham?
So, again, Dowie was the prototype. He was the faith healer that everybody wanted to be, because he was at one time known as the richest man in the West. Dowie had so much money flowing through him, through his organization. So when he died, there was a weird scenario that took place. In Zion City, people were flocking to Zion City trying to become the prophet who took the mantle, so to speak. They wanted to be the one who was Dowie's successor because they get access to all this money, right?
Yep.
So Bosworth was one of the people who, he was there. I don't believe he tried to take over the mantle, but what he did was actually smarter. He basically replicated what Dowie was doing and took his own show on the road with his brother, B.B. Bosworth.
Yeah, I remember that. And I have got, let me see if I can find it. Where is it? Let's see. Oh, here it is. This is a book that Bosworth wrote called Christ the Healer. Now, let me ask you that. I don't know. I'm actually asking this off the cuff because is this book based on the article that Bosworth wrote in The Voice of Healing? Would you say that I don't know if it is, but there is some things that sound pretty similar in here to that article about not being able to keep your healing or not?
Yeah, so it's not just one article.
Okay.
I have, there are several, we'll discuss this later, there are several missing, quote unquote, missing issues of Voice of Healing. I have the collection that most archives have on my website, and you can browse through the pages. Bosworth was deeply involved in creating this thing. And here's the problem. William Branham was one of hundreds of these evangelists. They're all doing the same thing. But I'm going to use Branham as the example because he's the one that I've researched the most. Branham would show up into these cities to heal the people. And the way that they operated was there were basically two things. They wanted to lift the faith of the people up to a level where they themselves would believe they were healed. Because, as you know, if you have enough confidence and you have enough, I don't like to use the term mind over matter, but if you truly believe that you get better, sometimes some ailments, if you become physically active, you can actually cure your own ailments. The body has the ability to.
It's kind of like the yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, almost like a placebo effect. Is that what you're kind of referring to?
Exactly. There's a video which, if you haven't seen it, I recommend you watch. It's there's a gentleman by the name of Darren Brown. It's called Miracles for Sale.
I've seen it.
Have you seen this?
I have.
Yeah. So for anybody who hasn't, this is an atheist who he creates an entire healing evangelism scheme with good intent. He brings all of these people in. He tells them they're healed. He does the whole faith healing act. And at the end of the show, he says, and there's people who literally said that they were healed by this atheist. And at the end of the show, he says, now I have a confession to make. I'm not a healer. I'm not even a believer. I did this to show you how easily you can be manipulated. And I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
So these guys were doing essentially that. The problem was not every ailment can the body heal itself. So in the newspapers, you'll find this. William Branham he claimed to have this vibration of the hand, similar to what Oral Roberts claimed to have. And he wore a very expensive luxury watch. Like in today's money, it's $12,000 watch. And he says, the reason I wear this back in there, whatever that money is in those days, I'm wearing this $12,000 watch because the vibration is so severe that it breaks a normal watch. And he would lay his hand on the sick people, and he would claim that if the hand turned a certain color, they couldn't be healed. And so then, as I'm reading this, I didn't know any of this when I was in this cult, but I'm thinking, so wait a minute, there are people that their sickness is too powerful for God.
Right.
That's what this guy's essentially saying, right? Well, not only that, the methodology of the healing in these meetings was, you must believe that you're healed. If you doubt at all, you're not healed. And you won't be immediately healed. after I leave town, after I'm on the road, that's when your healing's going to come. So It's like the snake oil salesman in Bonanza, right?
Mm-hmm.
Goes into town, the magic elixir comes, leaves town, and everybody finds, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this elixir.
Yeah. Wow.
So the problem existed. There were people who weren't being healed, and they were numerous people. There were people who were also planted in the revivals.
Mm-hmm.
On my website, you'll find a girl who's healed twice of the same disease. And there were people who Branham claimed that he resurrected out of the morgue, and the newspapers actually found that this is not the case. This didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
All of it to elevate their faith, so that when he left, that the people, wouldn't the people wouldn't know that this thing was all staged.
Yeah.
The problem was there were people who had the money and the power to sue. So there had to be some legal stipulations. Well, if you don't get healed, it's not our fault you didn't get healed. It's your fault.
It's your fault. Yeah.
Right?
And that's what, and is that the set of articles that Bosworth wrote in The Voice of Healing to kind of cover Branham's failed healings?
Yeah. So basically the necessity was that they needed a stipulation, that they needed a disclaimer. They needed the fine print that said, if you're not healed, it's not our fault. It's your fault. You didn't have enough faith, and therefore you caught your disease. Or, I don't know, are you familiar with James Randi?
Yes, I am. I've got a book by him that talks about the Peter Popoff incident in that book. Yes.
Branham is mentioned in that book. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I've read through it, but I haven't read the whole thing. But I do remember you mentioning that he is in there in one of your podcast episodes.
So if the other stipulation was, if you have sin in your life, you can't be healed. In other words, your sin is more powerful than God. So there's a guy that got healed, allegedly healed of blindness, I think it was. And then he came back because he wasn't healed. And William Branham said, no, it's because you smoke cigarettes.
I remember that. And I remember reading that article too. Absolutely. Can you imagine, John, Christ doing anything like these faith healers are doing? I mean, when Jesus healed somebody, they were healed. And he just literally either touched them or spoke or did whatever, and they were automatically healed, and they didn't lose their healing. But that's just something so that these false faith healers can cover their tracks.
Yeah, the hard part for me that I still struggle with, so my family grew up with William Branham's kids. My father played with William Branham's sons. I mean, we knew the family well, and they were well respected. Even our community, they're well respected. You don't picture an evil mind when you think of William Branham in this area. Mm-hmm. But on my website, there's a video of a girl who she entered the prayer line in one of the few videos that was captured of William Branham's prayer line. You can see that the girl is near death. She was dying. She's literally skin and bones. She's a little, I can't remember how old, I think 12 years old. And William Branham blatantly told her, you're healed. Go home, write me a letter, send me a letter, which was common among, the healing acts. They would ask people to send in letters, but none of these letters appear to exist is the problem. Well, so the girl goes home, and she died not long after.
This child here is suffering. It's been turned down by the doctors to die. It's leukemia. Isn't that right? You brought the child from out of town. You've traveled, coming from the west, coming east, you have come. You've come from a state that has mountains. It's Pennsylvania. And your city, I believe, is Chambersburg. Isn't that right? Bring the child to me. Little sister dear, the Lord Jesus was here. He'd lay his hands upon you, and death would leave you, and you'd live. Do you believe that I am his servant? Then in his stead I lay my hands on this child and bless it, and ask that the demon leaves the child, and that life comes to the child, and it will live and be well. Come out of the child, Satan, by the authority of God's Bible with the divine gift ministered by an angel. I adjure thee to leave the child. Come from him. You believe you're going to get well now. God bless you. Turn around, wave to the audience. God bless you. The little girl with tremendous faith, be well. God bless you, honey.
Wow.
So I can't imagine, I'm a father, I can't imagine my own children or anybody else's child to do this to a child. Not only that, but the mother who's standing there, now she's got her emotions just ripped apart because she thinks her daughter is going to be healed, and then she goes home and dies. What does it do to their emotions? What does it do to their faith? What does it do to what does it do to their mental health after all of this happens?
It's crazy. In the video that Steve and I did on Frank Sanford did some of the same things. He would command a fast, and he would even make the babies and the little children fast. And there, a 14-year-old boy, Leander Bartlett, died over this whole thing. So I mean, there are people that their lives are utterly destroyed. And people who lose their children over stuff like this, it's absolutely crazy. We're going to talk about Jim Jones in a second, but there is two things that I wanted to discuss, and that is, first of all, prayer cards, because you had mentioned that's a way that William Branham and others would find information out about people who were coming to their meetings. You talked about plants too. John G. Lake and Dowie both had plants in their healing meetings. So I want to talk about that. And then I want to talk about, you had mentioned, I was listening to your episodes on cultish, and I can't remember what episode it was, but you mentioned the entertainment of the faith healing meetings. So I want to talk about the prayer cards, and then I want to kind of talk about how people saw this. Really, a lot of it is entertainment, something to do, something to get excited about, and how it just kind of had to diminish because, as television came out and other things to distract people, they had to just get crazier and crazier, like UFO stories and stuff like that. So, so could we talk about the prayer cards first, and then maybe talk a little bit about the entertainment aspect of the faith healing meetings?
Yeah. So I'm going to get a little bit personal to go into the prayer cards. So I grew up in this religion, and William Branham had a series of recordings from, we're only allowed to hear the ones from 1947 and 1965, and only certain ones. There are some that are allegedly missing. In these sermons, they're mostly these faith healing meetings, and there are long stretches of prayer lines. So picture putting yourself in my shoes as opposed to your church. I would get up on Sunday. I was a kid. I didn't want to be there in the first place because I'm a kid. I want to go play my toys.
Yeah, right.
I have to go sit through 2.5 hours of a recording of some guy who died in 1965. I'm a kid. I don't understand why, but I have to sit there. I'm listening to, there is a part that is a sermon, but then it transitions into a prayer line. And the prayer line starts with, okay, let's call prayer cards B6 through B9. And I didn't understand all of this. As a kid, I didn't know why, number one, why am I listening to it? These are people, if they got healed, they were healed back in the 60s. But it was part of the cult makeup. It was part of the cult indoctrination. We were trained to believe that he was the literal voice of God, the spoken word. We were trained to believe that he was the return of Elijah the prophet, and that these prayer lines had spiritual significance to us. There were people who actually in our church who claimed their own healing because they heard somebody else with a similar condition being healed in this thing.
Wow.
So part of the way this worked was William Branham had what most people would call clairvoyance, but William Branham called it discernment. And this was, people would walk up to the platform and he would say, I perceive that you are Judy Smith and you're from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm just pulling names out, names and random names and places. And you're suffering from a gallbladder condition. Again, I'm just pulling up random names.
Yes.
This isn't an actual.
Your name is Eva.
Yes.
And your last name is York.
Yes.
And you live in this city.
Yes, I do.
And your house number is 613 6th Street.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
You're going home to be well. In the name of Jesus Christ, may she go and be made well. God bless you. Don't doubt. Just go rejoicing, happy. Now you're just a bit excited because of the presence of his being standing here. And I believe you're from out of town. You come from a capital too, Richmond, Virginia. You have a cancer. It's in your inside of your mouth, on your jaw. Is that right? You want to go home and be well? That's right. Accept Jesus as your healer. And in the name of Jesus Christ, may it leave the man. Go away from him. Amen. God bless you, sir. Go believing, having faith with all.
So we were trained to believe that this wasn't William Branham speaking. This was God speaking through him. God knew the person, the name, the address, the condition. Then the next person would show up. God knew their name, address, condition. And this would go on for a series of an hour, and I'm a kid listening to name, address, condition, name, address, condition, name, address, condition. The first time I saw a prayer card, I was completely floored. You mean to tell me that they're writing their name, their address, and their condition, and they're giving it to the ushers before they go into the building? You've got to be kidding me. So that wasn't enough to satisfy my curiosity. My grandmother entered a prayer line. William Branham knew her name, address, condition, and she didn't submit a prayer card.
Wow.
So that stumbled me. This was before technology. This was before. So there was this period of time after I escaped that I thought, okay, he had a real spiritual gift. And he was using the spiritual gift, but it went astray. That's what my original opinion was. But so I'm a software engineer. I know how software works. I have databases. If they were submitting their name, address, condition, and it were entering a database, I could easily search, okay, Judy Smith, what did she have? Where did she live? Well, this was before that technology existed. But what I didn't consider were two things. Number one, this was a database. It was just a hard-written database. They had these prayer cards. They collected these prayer cards. And years later, we saw these prayer cards, which means they still had these prayer cards. So it was a database. And my grandmother, like all faithful, went to meeting one, submitted her prayer card. William Branham would say he got, quote unquote, too tired in the spirit, didn't see all the people who submitted their prayer cards, then went to meeting 2, meeting 3, meeting 4, different city, different state. My grandparents traveled from state to state, city to city. Wherever he went, they went. So yes, she didn't submit a prayer card in this meeting, but that doesn't mean that she didn't submit one in Phoenix. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And
take that to the next level. Take that to the next level. Sorry to.
No, you're good. You're good. No, please.
Take that to the next level with the voice of healing.
That's what I was going to mention.
And address, or are you suffering? And do you know anybody else who is suffering with a condition?
So they got all of the information, not only from prayer cards, but through the subscriptions to the Voice of Healing magazine. So that they kept a humongous database of info on people who followed their cult. Wow. All right.
And this was nothing new. I read, I can't remember what book it was in, but I read about William Seymour. And he had a falling out with some lady. I can't remember the exact story, but she had his physical database of names and addresses.
That's right. I remember that.
Practice.
Yes, I remember that because he had a regular paper that was going out as well. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Exactly.
So let's talk about then. All right, so we've got that. Let's talk about the entertainment aspect of the times. How a faith healing meeting drew crowds because of the wild stories and the things that were told in these meetings.
Yeah, so this was surprising to me too. We put such reverence on these things. We thought that this was not only the voice of God speaking to us, but this was a holy thing. These people are going to a holy meeting. If he went into a building, the angels lined the walls of this meeting, right? The first time that I saw that they had hot dog stands, I was like, you gotta be kidding me, man. I was floored. I read where, it was actually a huge problem. These meetings were larger than the capacity of the buildings could hold. That's why they had the tents. That's why there were tent revivals, because they might enter a city that didn't have a building that could hold the massive number of people that would come.
Yeah.
So they put a tent up. Well, that presents a new problem. Say you have 5,000, 10,000 people in this massive tent. Well, they have to have it outside of the city limits. There has to be a coordination to get the people to get food. They actually have to bring food. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you end up with a bad situation.
Right.
There was a meeting there's one in Canada that I found and one in California where housing became a problem. They didn't have enough hotels to hold all the people. So people were offering their homes, they were offering food. They had fleets of hot dog trucks from other cities come in to help feed the people.
Wow.
I mean, this was a big event, man.
Man. So so that stuff drew people. I'll never forget reading a newspaper article. I don't know if you're familiar with Mariah Woodworth Etter, the trance evangelist from the early 1800s, mid 1900s, or I don't know, late 1800s, I should say, through the early 1900s. Are you familiar with her at all?
I've read the name, and that's about it. I haven't researched that yet.
Well, she had the same thing. She people would come to her meetings and they would fall out in trances, and that's what attracted a lot of the people. They wanted to come and see all these people that just all of a sudden went into trances in her meeting. So that's why she was called the trance evangelist. But she did the same thing. She had concession stands outside of her meetings. She sold her books, and she did all kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a big entertainment thing. Okay, go ahead.
I have a side story which is somewhat related. Whenever I escaped, I started working to help others, and we created this network of support groups. There are people in the support groups who were in these meetings as children, and those are the ones that I usually want to talk to.
Yeah.
Because the ones who are the adults, they're the ones who are most manipulated and indoctrinated, and they have these blinders on. They can only see the reverend on the platform and the spiritual aspect. They don't see everything. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite stories that came from one of the children. This was a person who was in these meetings as entertainment, didn't see it as as this religious thing. This is just this weird, let's go get healed thing. There was a sermon, but in the child's mind, it had separated the sermon from the healing part.
Yep.
And it was just a prayer line, like any other church would have a prayer line, right? Mm-hmm. So she became curious about everything else, the environment. And she's watching the people entering the prayer line, and she's watching people walk up and be given wheelchairs because it's too long to stand. Your legs get tired. Or if they're elderly. And it wasn't to those people, it wasn't that anything mischievous was being done. Mm-hmm. If you're 70 years old and you're not going to stand in this line for hours and hours and hours, let's give you a wheelchair and we'll carry you up. To them, they're like, well, yeah, why would I not do it?
Yeah.
Well, when they get to the platform and are prayed for and then rise out of the wheelchair,
What are you going to think?
what are you going to think? And then you have statements by William Branham, we carried away 10,000 wheelchair patients. Well,
Wow.
yeah, they didn't enter as a wheelchair patient. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it reminds me, John Alexander Dowie used to have the crutches and all of the stuff all over his wall as trophies, as he would, he would have them hanging up on his wall. So yeah, that was something. Can we talk now about the connection between Jim Jones and William Branham? Because I don't know that a lot of people realize that Jim Jones was in the Message cult. That's huge. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah, so so this will be the first interview that I've even talked about some of what is going on behind the scenes. Mm. In the book that you read and in the videos that you watched and most of what's been published so far, I only saw the picture as the information was presented, and much of the information has been concealed. Mm. The Voice of Healing issues around that time period are missing. The sermon recordings, when I first wrote that book, the sermons for the 1956 convention with Jim Jones were quote unquote misfiled. They were in different places, and I called them out on my blog, and the cult headquarters then moved the sermons into their correct location. Mm. Well, this is just one of several conventions and meetings that Jim Jones and William Branham held together. Jim Jones was in the Message, and he called it the Message in his own handwriting. Mm-hmm. The Message is the name universally that the cult goes by, the Message cult following of William Branham. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know why. What is this thing? Why is Jim Jones in this? Because if you look at later versions of Jim Jones, he looks nothing like William Branham. Mm-hmm. So what we have recently uncovered is that we first thought that it was from 1956 to 1957 was the window of time that Jim Jones was a Message minister.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your video. Yep.
Yeah. What we're learning is this happened much earlier. Jones was converted into the movement much earlier. And there was an explosive event as to why he did leave the cult following. It wasn't exactly 1957, but he and Branham parted ways over a very explosive situation in 1957. Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some huge history. It's a very complicated history to understand it. You have to first, to people who are in this religion or who are familiar with the history as it has been written by the cult itself, you have to understand the stage personas and the different versions of the cult, because the history makes it seem incompatible with Jones. Mm. But when you understand that the William Branham stage persona wasn't the same, there were different versions of the stage persona, and each of those different versions have sometimes polar opposite positions and views. Mm. The version that I grew up with was that William Branham was one of the few men who taught the truth of oneness Pentecostalism, that he was a oneness Pentecostal. The first time that I saw him publicly say, we accept the Holy Trinity, I was floored. I was shocked. It was, it's just totally different than what history has been written. Mm. Well, Jones joined at the time that it was a convergence between the Latter Rain revival and the Voice of Healing revival. Both joined together for a period of time. Jones joined in during the height of its popularity. William Branham was a Latter Rain preacher, and at that point in time, it was advertised as the Latter Rain Message.
Yeah.
And it wasn't original to William Branham. This was a collaborative message. This was something that all ministers were joining in to the Latter Rain Message.
Can I just ask really quickly, was Oral Roberts a part of that early Latter Rain message in the beginning?
Oral Roberts was one of the original editors, I believe it was, of Voice of Healing. He was very deeply involved with the latter rain.
Mm.
So, and it gets a little bit tricky to determine which men were latter rain and which were Voice of Healing, because there's a period of time, again, when they were all one and the same.
Right.
And what happened was, so the latter rain, if you've studied it, you didn't have to have any theological experience. Like, you didn't even have to know the Bible. William Branham himself often said, I don't know the book real well, but I know the author, but let me teach you the book.
Wow.
So what was happening is you get these men who believe they have some supernatural spiritual calling to teach, and they don't even know what's in the Bible itself. This created a huge problem, right? So they were starting to see not only was horrifically wrong doctrine being introduced, but men with evil intent. There was no checks and balances. Men without any boundaries to ethics were joining into this thing.
Wow.
And it was turning into chaos. So the Assemblies of God announced in their constitution, this thing is not right, and we denounce it.
Mm-hmm.
When they did, it caused this rift all through Pentecostalism. The two began to diverge and started pointing fingers at each other. No, we're not latter rain. No, we're not Voice of Healing. But they were all one and the same for a period of time.
Okay. And Jim Jones came in was he invited originally by William Branham?
What happened, as best we can tell, see, the history's been erased. It's very difficult to piece together. What tipped me off initially, there's a book called The Raven. I think it's Ritterman is the author of that. But he talks about William Branham. Jones mentioned first hearing William Branham at a local revival in, I think it's Connorsville, Indiana, somewhere it's near Richmond where he grew up.
Okay.
And on my website, we have a new feature called the timeline. And if you go to the Jim Jones page, I'm actually pulling it up now so I can get the dates for you.
Okay.
But on there is a link at the bottom of the page to timeline, and it lists the whole timeline of events for this. And William Branham spoke at a convention it is Connorsville. He and Ern Baxter in 1953. Jim Jones was attending apostolic churches even as a child. So he would have, again, this is entertainment. This is in a rural community. There's nothing else to do. I don't care if you're religious or not. You're going to go see this attraction, right?
Right, yeah.
So he would have been there, right? According to Raven and according to Jim Jones' testimony, which that was derived from, that had a huge impact on him. So William Branham did influence him to want to at least, head this direction.
Yeah.
Well, he started speaking in, I think it was 1953, if I'm reading this timeline right. 1954, he started holding his own healing revivals. And before long, he joins before the split of Assemblies of God, he becomes an Assemblies of God minister.
Okay.
He's preaching with them, and he's preaching in a church that is allowing the latter rain faith healing revivals to be preached. Something happens. I don't know. I have bits and pieces. I don't know what, but there was a huge falling out because this is one of the churches affected by the split. They didn't go to the independent Assemblies of God. They stayed with the assemblies, and they brought in like leadership from corporate Assemblies of God to come fix the situation. Jones got booted.
Okay.
When he did, he was very upset. And on my website, you'll find his ordination papers into the Independent Assemblies of God by latter rain leader Joseph Matson Bose.
And he was a promoter of Branham, yeah?
Yeah, he was a promoter of Branham. He was a big promoter of all of the Voice of Healing evangelists before, during, and after Jones.
Okay.
On the back of that ordination papers, Jones writes a note that basically, if you read it and know the history, he's basically condemning all of these people who didn't join into the latter rain.
Wow.
And he's very clearly upset. So he joined being upset, right?
Wow. It's just incredible. And I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, John. I really wanted to get to the Elijah part as well, because you have so many in the Pentecostal movement, early Pentecostal movement, that claim to be Elijah, the prophet of Malachi 4, right? So you had John Alexander Dowie was one. Charles Fox Parham later did the same thing. Frank Sanford did the same thing. And William Branham claimed to be Elijah as well, as did Jim Jones. Can you talk about both of their claims as the Malachi 4 Elijah? If you've got a few more minutes.
I was very surprised. So I do a lot of work with the Jonestown Institute, jonestown.sdsu.
Okay.
I write in their newsletter. I'm doing some research. This timeline was a request by theirs, actually, and it will soon be published by them. This history is insane. On their website, they have all the transcripts that they can get access to of Jones. And to do my study for them on the convergence between William Branham and Jim Jones, I really needed to peek under the hood of Jones and see how he thought and how he operated.
Right.
So I've actually read every sermon that they have on their website.
Wow.
I've studied it. I've listened to the death tapes, which are horrific. And what's interesting is when I read Raven, so Raven was the first introduction that I even had to Jones. Other than they drank Kool-Aid, I knew nothing about Jones before I read the Raven. And not only that book, but some of the others, they paint Jones with a very atheist point of view. They say he was Pentecostal until he turned atheist, basically. Well, when I'm reading his quote-unquote atheist sermons, I can see, now that I know Orthodox Christianity, why they're saying this. I understand what would make them say that, but I also know the inside view of what's in Jones's head from being with Branham, that I don't at all think he turned atheist.
Okay.
He's basically repeating exactly the doctrinal structure that William Branham laid with his manifested sons of God theology, which you have to understand the Malachi 4 prophecy.
Okay. And I should have my Bible up to to read that prophecy there, but we'll get to that soon enough. So you had told me that before we did this interview, which again, folks, this is an off-the-cuff interview. So John, thank you so much for doing this. This just really means a lot. I really appreciate it. You said that you had a bomb that you wanted to drop here about William Branham. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think to best understand the bomb that's going to be dropped, let me go a bit deeper on the Malachi 4 thing.
Okay.
Because you have to understand the significance of this bomb. William Branham taught the manifested sons of God theology. And that was the structure basically for the creation of Jim Jones. This theology was that in the last days, God would manifest himself into the church, into what is known as the fivefold ministry. God sends prophets, evangelists, teachers. I've drawn a blank on the five.
Yeah.
But such that it wasn't a coming of Jesus Christ that others thought, other churches today understand from the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It was that God would manifest himself to a certain level within individuals. Some individuals would have a greater manifestation, some would have a lesser manifestation. William Branham taught one of the strange things that we believed was that William Branham could speak squirrels into existence so that he could kill them.
Wow.
He mentions this on tape, and I can remember as a kid going around trying to speak things into existence because I wanted that manifestation. I wanted to be able to. This is like Superman. This is like reading the Marvel comics.
Yeah.
I want this superpower, man. How do I get it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jim Jones is a kid who's hearing this thing. Of course he wants the superpower.
Yeah.
I wanted the superpower. I was a kid, and a lot of people that I knew. So one of the things I came across when studying Jones is he talks about, I have a greater manifestation, and my son also has a manifestation. So he's talking about the manifested sons of God.
Wow.
So within this framework, again, Dowie is the prototype. Dowie was known as Elijah in Zion City. Dowie believed that he was a manifestation of Elijah the prophet from the Old Testament, right? So to understand this, you have to understand that people can be under this theology, people can have a manifestation of God. It might not be Jesus. It might be a prophet. It might be. I've encountered other cults that were created who thought they had the manifestation of David or Moses.
Yeah.
I found one article in Atlanta that said, when will people realize that every person claiming to be David or Moses or Elijah are just wanting your money?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the David thing, because I didn't mention this on the last video that Steve Kozar and I did on Frank Sanford, but not only did Frank Sanford claim to be Elijah, but he also claimed to be David too. So it's very interesting that you say that. So yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, so what happened was, if you study William Branham and those around him, after they start losing popularity, there seems to be a lot of mental health issues, not just in Branham, but in all of them. They all struggle. Some of them turned to alcoholism. Some of them left Christianity altogether. Some of them homosexuality, when they'd preached their whole life against homosexuality. So there's a lot of problems that exist psychologically. William Branham, in the last years of his life, that's whenever his doctrine went totally off the rails. The Assemblies of God have left him. The independent Assemblies of God, most of them have left except for Matson Bose and A.W. Rasmussen. Latter Rain has abandoned him. The Full Gospel Businessman has abandoned him. Literally everybody who supported him in the early years left him. And those are the years where William Branham started heavily promoting his idea that Elijah of the last days was to come to announce Jesus Christ. He would be a manifestation of Elijah. And then in the very last year of his life, actually the very last months of his life, after he had convinced all of his following that he was this return of Elijah, he says, now the Elijah of this day is actually the Lord Jesus Christ in the form of a man. He's not a man, but God in the form of a prophet. So this progression, if you look at the timeline of William Branham's life to his death, now line that up with the timeline of Jones to his death. Jones claimed that same manifestation. His followers called him Elijah, and towards the end of his life, he started going off the rails and also claiming to be God. So the timeline for both men is exactly the same. The structural framework of their doctrine is exactly the same.
Wow.
Their theology is different, but it doesn't matter under the manifested sons of God. With the manifested sons of God theology, the messenger, the Elijah, was writing a new word, a spoken word, which superseded the written word.
Wow.
So Jones could literally preach anything he wanted and still be within Branham's framework.
Wow.
So that's the background to the bomb that's about to drop. There was a period of time where everything converged, and William Branham, the Voice of Healing, the Latter Rain, Jim Jones, all of these men were joined together. Jim Jones was a leader in this movement. He became, we've actually identified the Voice of Healing issues where Jones became a Voice of Healing evangelist.
Wow.
He was a message minister.
Oh,
he was
man.
hosting Voice of Healing revivals, not just in Indianapolis, but also other cities and other states. He was the host pastor.
Wow.
He was real big into this until July 1957. And I've not even put the issue up yet. We still want to get all the facts correct, so we're still going through it. But 1957 in Indianapolis is interesting because William Branham's cult headquarters is withholding most of the sermons William Branham preached. They're not in the lineup of recordings that they have. The issues for Voice of Healing were missing. We uncovered one single archive in the whole country that had them. And in this archive, it was June 1957, the July issue of Voice of Healing, apparently William Branham did or said something that was horrifically wrong, insomuch that several of the evangelists in Voice of Healing denounced William Branham. They wrote an open letter to William Branham. They signed it, so it's like a petition.
Yeah.
They dispersed it among all themselves and sent it into Voice of Healing. And Gordon Lindsey was forced to discuss this open letter condemning William Branham to death.
What?
On Voice of Healing.
Condemning him to death, literally to death.
Literally condemning to. Now picture this. In the Voice of Healing article, it mentioned specifically condemning him to death, and many of these evangelists were signing it. They were literally condemning William Branham to death over something he did or said. One of the people named specifically was, what was his name? A. Allen was named specifically in the article.
Wow. So Allen was even connected to this whole latter rain message.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Allen was in this thing. Well, Roberts was in this thing. And so I've been working with the Jonestown Institute for a long time, and I've known this, and I think it's mentioned in the book. I couldn't understand it. It's out of context. But Jim Jones also condemned William Branham to death.
Wow.
Prophetically in the latter rain way. I'm going to read you the quote from, and you can listen to Jones' own words saying this, but I'm going to read you the quote that I had previously that didn't make sense to me, and then I'll explain it. Jones says, "Some are listening. They won't tell you the truth because the black book, the Bible, is the easiest gravy train that they've ever been on. Yet A. Allen, Oral Roberts," and he misnames him, but he later corrects himself, so I'm going to use the correct name. A. Allen, Oral Roberts, and Billy Branham, and Imes, which is one of the People's Temple leaders, Jack, which he's referring to Jack Arnold Beam, also a People's Temple leader, and me met in the Claypool Hotel. And he's talking about William Branham. He says, William Branham said, "I don't believe a thing in that Bible hardly, but it's the easiest way to make a living." Wow. And then he pauses and he said, again, he uses the incorrect name, but then he corrects himself. He says, Billy Graham, who I prophesied his death. Then he corrects himself, Billy Branham, rather.
Some are listening. They won't tell you the truth because the black book is the easiest gravy train that they've ever been on. Yet Allen came to me. Oral Roberts spoke this. Billy Graham came right to us. Imes, Jack, and me in Claypool Hotel said, "I don't believe a thing in that Bible hardly." But he said, it's the way to make a living. Billy Graham, who I prophesied his death, Billy Branham rather, said his head would be, I said he'd lose his head. His head was cut off in Texas. He said, "You can't preach the truth about that Bible." He said, "You preach reincarnation. You cannot preach the truth about the Bible. You will be in trouble." I said, "I choose to preach preach the truth. He said, well, I'll be around while you will be in trouble. While I'm still here, and his head is cut off from his body.
So I had this information. I knew this information, but there was no context. Why did he prophesy the death? What was the prophecy of death? Why was Allen there? Why was Oral Roberts there? None of this made any sense. And again, at this point in time, I didn't know about all of the meetings between that William Branham and Jones collaborated with. I knew at that time only of the one meeting in 1956 at Cadle Tabernacle in Indianapolis. That's the only one I knew about.
Yeah.
The cult has hidden all of the rest of them. So now I've got all these pieces. Now picture this. There were several men in this open letter who were predicting, prophesying William Branham's death. I also have on my website, it's, what is his name? There were several others who were predicting his death at the same time, but there was no context. I didn't realize that it was all pointing to this open letter. Mm-hmm. And basically they said William Branham he's gone in, one of the prophecies says he's gone in the way of Dowie. They specifically mentioned Dowie, which is referring to the Elijah prophecy. Mm. So something he said in 1957, which was significant enough for both the cult, Voice of Healing, Gordon Lindsey, everyone to withhold all this information. Something William Branham said got him ousted from Voice of Healing for several months. He did join back in.
I was going to ask that.
And whatever happened was so significant that when he joined back in, they actually had to rename the magazine. It was no longer Voice of Healing for a period of months. Then it transitions back to Voice of Healing. Again, without William Branham, he finally got ousted entirely.
Yeah, so let me ask you this then. When you look at the Wikipedia, if I remember correctly, looking at the Wikipedia article on William Branham, it mentions that, he was in, he was I don't want to say editor, was he the editor of the Voice of Healing for a time?
The original issue, the very first issue. In fact, let me pull it up so that I quote it correctly, because a lot of people don't know this. It wasn't intended to be what it became. This magazine was literally created to promote America's Voice of Healing, William Branham.
Okay.
And the very first issue was called The Voice of Healing, an inter-evangelical publication of the Branham Healing Campaigns.
Wow. So I just remember, and I'm pretty, I'm not looking at the article, so I'm trying to go by memory here, that Gordon Lindsey, there was a time in that article that Branham had left, and they said something like Lindsey was surprised that Branham, he was promoting Branham, and then just a year or two later, Branham leaves. Does that have something to do with what you just mentioned, the bomb that you just dropped there?
It really appears so that Branham left multiple times.
Okay.
Branham suffered mental health issues severely a lot. And if you read the Voice of, I didn't even know that. I was reading Voice of Healing, and it has prayer requests for William Branham. He suffered great nervous breakdown. I can't remember how they word it, but basically it's a nervous breakdown. It's a depressive state, and he had to leave the revival tours. So when he first left, that opened the door for all the other ministers. When he came back, now he's got competition, and that really accelerated the mental health issues that pre-existed. 1957, after the Jones fiasco and the open letter, it appears they booted him entirely. But even from Branham's side, they really didn't talk about what happened. Mm. They basically just alluded to the fact that we needed to separate for a while, and they didn't really talk about the fact that half of I don't know how many, several of these evangelists were openly condemning Branham to death.
Unbelievable. Wow, John, that was a climax to an interview right there, man. Wow. John, you are an extremely busy man. You're an author. You've put together this amazing website with just an incredible amount of research, and I'm going to put all those links in the YouTube description. I'm also going to pop this up on the Messed Up Church podcast as well, so they can look at the YouTube channel, they can listen to the podcast if they'd like. So I'm going to put all your links. You're just, you taking the time to come on here, this little YouTube channel, that really, I just greatly appreciate that. And I really think this is going to be a helpful, very helpful episode. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to do this. My number one intent is just to get the information out.
Yeah.
And the more channels the more information that we can broadcast through podcasts like yours and others, I'm very happy to help anyone who wants to help spread the information.
Very good. And so maybe we can get together again and talk more about William Branham, because we really, honestly, I mean, we just crammed a bunch of information in about an hour. You spent 6 hours talking to the cultish guys. So, I mean, and you still, like you said, you still didn't really scratch the surface. There's so much depth there. We didn't talk about Roy E. Davis. We didn't talk about William Upshaw. We didn't talk about any of those white supremacist leaders, or Roy Davis was Branham's pastor and his influence. So there's just a ton of stuff we could just talk about. But
yeah, there's so many interesting histories.
Well, thank you so much, John. I so appreciate it, and I'll hopefully we'll be talking to you again soon.
Sounds good. I enjoyed it.
All right.